discovering evidence, interrogating witnesses, and uncovering the truth. All of these are things you typically might find yourself doing in a detective video game. Investigation games, mystery games, lawyer games, they all kind of fit into a broad category I just like to call detective games, where the goal is to find the truth in a variety of different perplexing situations. So today, I wanted to talk about 3 games in the genre that I like. I don't think there's a better place to start than with L.A. Noire, developed by Team Bondi and released in 2011. L.A. Noire takes place in 1947 Los Angeles, where you play as a young man by the name of Cole Phelps. Cole is a World War II veteran who recently came back to America. He joins the police force, and after a very successful year as a simple beat cop, he manages to get promoted to police detective. Now, it is up to you, as Cole, to investigate all sorts of crimes in LA, from theft, assault, and conspiracy to cold-blooded murder, and bring the perpetrators who committed these crimes to justice. Now, before I get too deep into the core gameplay loop, I'd be remiss not to mention the immaculate vibes that this game gives off. The whole 1940s aesthetic is beautiful. The fancy cars, the sharp suits, and the gorgeous LA architecture that was meticulously recreated by Team Bondi to make the game's locations as faithful to real-world 1940s LA as reasonably possible. There's even various historical landmarks throughout the game that you can find. If you really want to get immersed, there's even a black and white filter you can put on to really give the game that old school movie vibe. Visually, this game still looks really good. I'm playing the PC version, which I'm not sure if it got graphical updates over the years or not. I know there was a remastered version of the game on console, but whatever the case may be, the game is a treat for your eyes. One of the aspects of L.A. Noire that was heavily hyped up when the game was first about to come out was the facial animation. For a few decades at this point, motion capture technology has been used to track the movements of actors and copy those movements into the game for the character models to replicate. L.A. Noire took things a step further and used advanced motion capture technology to capture the movements of actors' faces. With this technology, you could copy the very minute, subtle movements of an actor's face into 3D models in the game. Sometimes the facial expressions can be a little jank, but overall, these facial animations are still good to this day. I think it's only been in the last 5 years or so that games have managed to reach L.A. Noire's level of complex facial animations, which is really impressive for a game that's over a decade old. While visually L.A. Noire still looks good, in terms of aesthetic, I think the music might have the visuals beat. L.A. Noire actually has licensed music in it. This game features music from some of the most influential artists in the 1940s, like Louis Armstrong, Bing Crosby, and Billie Holiday. These songs play on the radio in people's houses or in cars, which I really like. It actually makes the music feel like it's a part of the world. But not only does this game have great licensed music, it has a stellar original soundtrack as well, composed primarily by brothers Andrew and Simon Hale. This soundtrack is a fantastic collection of great jazz tracks. There's smooth songs, suspenseful songs, mysterious songs. It's just amazing. This is a soundtrack that I come back to all of the time. Some of my favorites are New Beginning Part 3, Slow Brood, and of course, the stellar main theme of the game. Okay, I've been talking for a while now, and I haven't even gotten to the gameplay, so let's get on to that. So at first glance, this game might seem like GTA in the 1940s. It's open world, it deals with crime, it's a third-person shooter, heck, it's published by Rockstar, the GTA developers. But L.A. Noire is definitely its own beast. The open world in this game looks really nice, but it isn't particularly lively. There isn't a ton of fun stuff to do in it. There are dispatch call side quests you can do, but for the most part, the open world exists as more of a pretty background for the actual core of the gameplay, the police cases. Over the course of the game, you'll get different cases that you have to complete. Completing one case will send you to the next, slowly but surely raising Cole's rank in the police force. There are quite a number of parts to the cases, like car chases, puzzle solving, as well as some combat, but the 2 main sections of the game's cases are searching for evidence and interrogating persons of interest. Searching for evidence is pretty self-explanatory. You go around looking for clues. Where L.A. Noire really shines is in the interrogations. Here, you have to listen to people's statements and determine whether they're telling the truth or not. If they're not telling the truth, you can call them out on their lie if you have the evidence to prove it, or if you don't have enough evidence, you can simply doubt them. Earlier, I spent a ton of time talking about the game's facial animations, and those animations are one of your main tools to gauge whether or not someone is lying or not. Some of these facial expressions are really obvious, especially in the early game, but some people do have decent poker faces. This truth, doubt, lie system is simple, but it works, and it remains fun all throughout the game's runtime. In the remaster for consoles, for some reason, they changed truth, doubt, lie to good cop, bad cop, accuse. There's no gameplay difference, it's just the names that are changed, but I don't think good cop, bad cop, accuse is as intuitive as truth, doubt, lie. One of my favorite parts about this system is that you can actually get some of the answers wrong. When you interrogate someone, there will usually be a handful of topics you can question them about. If, for example, they lie and you don't catch them on it, the game doesn't say, hey, go back and try again until you get it right. The game just moves on, meaning you could potentially lose out on some useful information from the person that could help get the full story of the case. This helps add a layer of tension to the game since there's actually a possibility that you can lose and the bad guys can get away with their crimes. Speaking of possibilities, there actually are a fair amount of alternate pathways that you can take to get to the end of some cases. The overall pace of the game is really good. Most of the game's cases aren't any longer than an hour, so you're constantly getting new faces and adventures. The game never really gets boring. LA Noire's main plot that develops over the course of the game has some problems, but the day-to-day solving cases is really fun. LA Noire is a really big game, so let's scale things back a bit and talk about a much simpler game, Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, developed by Capcom and released in 2001 for the Game Boy Advance as a Japan exclusive. Westerners wouldn't get this game until the 2005 remake for the Nintendo DS. In Ace Attorney, you play as the titular attorney Phoenix Wright, and like LA Noire, you have to investigate crime scenes and interrogate witnesses. But Ace Attorney takes things a step further because you have to represent defendants as their lawyer in court. Witnesses will give testimonies, and it's up to you to spot the contradictions in those testimonies to clear the names of your clients. You can press the witnesses on certain statements to gather more information, and there are a few times where you'll have to answer questions, but besides that, the court sections are relatively simple. Ace Attorney is like a spot the difference game, but instead of spot the difference, it's spot the lie. The witnesses' testimonies will typically be a short passage, only a few text boxes in length, and you'll have to find the piece of evidence that contradicts one of those text boxes. Besides the courtroom segments, the other major part of the game are the investigation segments, where you go around looking for evidence by moving your cursor around and clicking on different parts of the screen to look closer at specific points. These are my least favorite portions of the game. They're not bad by any means, mostly because it's here you get to meet many of the game's characters. Ace Attorney has a lovely cast of memorable characters, all with their own fun quirks and weird dialogue. The interactions in this game are absolutely hilarious. Despite being about very serious subject matter, the game doesn't take itself too seriously, and the over-the-top sprites exemplify this perfectly. The sprite work in this game is great. It's unfortunate that the Ace Attorney HD Trilogy collection that's available on most modern platforms redrew the game's sprites, and I don't know, I just don't like it. These sprites aren't terrible, but I think the game's very simple animations just don't translate well to HD graphics. With pixel art, simpler animations don't look bad since your imagination can kind of fill in the gaps. But the super clean high-def images make the animations look really jarring. But enough about the graphics, the music is where this game really shines. Oh boy, this soundtrack is chiptune heaven. This is one of those games where every single song in the soundtrack is a banger, with the Objection theme, Maya's theme, and Tell the Truth being some of my personal favorites. All of the music was done by one person, Masakazu Sugimori, who also did work on Beautiful Joe and Ghost Trick Phantom Detective. The team who worked on this game was really small, which only makes how great the game came out even more impressive. This game really is a passion project. If you want to play it, it's on a ton of different systems. I have the Ace Attorney Trilogy, which has the first 3 games on 3DS, and the cool thing about this version of the game is that you can actually yell into the 3DS microphone to press witnesses and deliver the game's iconic objections.
Hold it!
The way I originally played the first game is through its release on the Wii's WiiWare service. This version adds motion controls to the game, but before you get all up in arms, I actually think the motion controls are really cool, because you can swing your Wii remote like you're presenting evidence. It's really simple, but it just feels so satisfying to do. Unfortunately, you can't buy new games from the Wii Shop channel, so this version is essentially gone. But as neat as I think the motion controls are, this version of the game did have one big issue, which was that the 5th case of the first game was DLC in this version. When Ace Attorney was first released on the GBA, it only had 4 cases. Later, when the game was released on DS, a new 5th case was added. For some reason, they didn't include the 5th case in the WiiWare version. You had to buy it separately, and sadly for me, I never bought this, so unfortunately my version of Ace Attorney on the Wii will just forever be incomplete. It's also sad because currently there's no way to play Ace Attorney with the original pixel art, but honestly, the HD trilogy doesn't look too bad on 3DS, probably because of the lower resolution screen. However you decide to play the game though, I'm sure you'll have a great time because Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney is great over-the-top fun. But what's even more over-the-top than Ace Attorney is Danganronpa. Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc was developed by Spike and released in 2010 for the PSP. Danganronpa is compared to Ace Attorney a lot, as both games are detective visual novels where you gather evidence and take part in trials. However, besides those two things, these games are very different. For one, the story. In Ace Attorney, you play as, well, an attorney, but in Danganronpa, you play as a high school student named Makoto Naegi, who's been invited to a super special school called Hope's Peak Academy, where many of Japan's most gifted students all come together to improve their talents. However, after getting to Hope's Peak, Makoto and his 14 other classmates wind up being trapped inside of the school by an evil robot bear named Monokuma. The only way to get out of the school is to kill another student, but the twist is, you have to kill them without getting caught. After every murder, a class trial is held, and the guilty party is determined by popular vote. If the killer makes it through the class trial without being found guilty, they get to make it out of the school, but all of the other students are killed. If the class manages to figure out who the killer is though, then only the killer dies. Danganronpa is split up into 3 major sections: investigations, free time, and the class trials. Investigations are pretty self-explanatory. You go around looking for clues. Next, you have free time, which is where you can hang out with one of the other students, give them gifts, and learn more about them. What makes the free time really cool is that it deepens your connection with the game's cast. And deepening that connection makes the moment when one of them dies that much more painful. This isn't a problem per se, but more or less just a result of the way the games are designed. But in a lot of detective games, and well, most detective murder mystery media in general, the victims are usually random people, which means you really don't care that they died. However, in Danganronpa, the people who die are your fellow classmates, people you've come to get to know and love over the course of the game's very long runtime. Their deaths have a significant impact, which makes you want to find out who the killer is even more, and you find out who the killer is through the class trials. Class trials are somewhat similar to the trials in Phoenix Wright, but with like 3 times the amount of characters talking and 3 times the amount of gameplay elements. Danganronpa's trials can be pretty complex, as the trials are divided into multiple different minigames. The main minigame, and probably the most iconic, is the non-stop debate. In non-stop debates, characters will talk back and forth with each other about what they think happened, and some of the words they say will be highlighted. These are called weak points. It's up to you to use your evidence, called truth bullets, that contradict those weak points and shoot through them. Now you know why the game's subtitle is Trigger Happy Havoc. That's the basic gist of it, although it does get a bit more complex later. The next minigame is Hangman's Gambit. In these, you just have to shoot the letters that spell out a certain keyword you need. Next is Bullet Time Battle, which is a rhythm minigame where you have to stay on beat and destroy the suspect's weak points. Finally, there's the Closing Argument, which is where you have to fill in a comic book detailing the timeline of the murder. I don't hate any of these minigames, they're all fine. I just don't really see a reason to include all of these weird gameplay changes, especially the rhythm game. Speaking of rhythm, I guess I should talk about the music too, since I did so with the other 2 games. And yeah, the soundtrack composed by Masafumi Takada is superb. You kinda need to have an awesome soundtrack for a mystery game, as you're gonna spend a ton of time just sitting around thinking. A lot of the songs used for Danganronpa's Clash Trials sound like rave music, which you'd think wouldn't really fit, but they have this trance-like feeling to them which always gets my brain working. There are a lot of great tracks here, like Beautiful Dead, New World Order, and Clash Trials Sun Edition. Besides the music, one thing you'll be hearing a lot of is the dialogue. This game is vulgar as heck. There's plenty of swearing, plenty of toilet humor, and just overall degeneracy. The developers must have figured, hey, we're getting an M rating for all the blood and murder, so we might as well make the most of it. All of the characters in this game are insanely over the top, but that's what makes them so memorable. And like I mentioned before, the fact that you get to be with these characters over the course of the game allows you to grow attached to them and see how they grow and develop because of the events of the game's story. One of the weirdest things about the characters though is that they're 2D. Like, they're 2D cutouts in a 3D world. Danganronpa has a really unique visual style. Given this is a PSP visual novel, they kinda had to get creative, but the game does look cool, especially in the rare moments that you get a cutscene. Danganronpa is just a really wild and one-of-a-kind experience. I can talk all day about all three of these games, but I think it's about time I started winding down. There really is nothing better than solving mysteries with some sick rave music or some smooth jazz in the background. There are a ton of other cool detective games out there, but today I specifically wanted to talk about 3 games that impacted me at some point in my life. But hey, there's always time to talk about other cool detective games next time.